So the book of Samuel mentions this city, Shiloh, the city of God, and it's a fascinating little study with some twists and turns to it. So I want to take a brief moment out of our schedule this week to look at Shiloh, the city of God. So here I show you a map of where Shiloh is located. And you can see that it is located in Ephraim, west of the Jordan River, north of Jerusalem, south of Shechem. So I'll give you a second there to look at the map there to locate it yourself. Archaeologically, it is known as the site of Kirbet Siloon. I think modern Hebrew is just Tel Shiloh, so there is an active dig going on there. So here's where it gets a little interesting. I want to spend a lot of time on this because I want to save some time to read from an essay that gives a little detail into this. But Shiloh occurs 30 times in the Old Testament, and 9 of those times, so a little over a quarter of the times, occurs in 1st and 2nd Samuel. The first occurrence is in Genesis 49:10. This is in the promises or the prophecies made to the 12 sons of Israel, where it says the scepter remains in Judah until Shiloh comes, and that's a complicated textual problem, and in all likelihood the phrase until Shiloh comes has been corrupted somewhere along the way in textual transmission. Gordon Wenham, in his commentary on Genesis in the Word Biblical Commentary series, makes a good suggestion here that doesn't change the Hebrew consonants or pointings at all with terms of the Hebrew text, but is able to divide the consonants to retranslate this as until his tribute comes, which makes sense to me in light of the many different suggestions that have made that don't make a whole lot of sense. Wenham's suggestion there is probably the best. So in short, probably Shiloh is not Shiloh there in Genesis 49:10. In Joshua 18, lots were cast in Shiloh to determine land disbursements. And in Judges 18:31, the house of God was set in Shiloh. So we have some early history of Shiloh as being a somewhat of a cultic center, at least having some cultic viability to it. And of course, in Samuel, as we have looked at earlier, especially with Hannah, that this was a place where Samuel met. This was where the priests were meeting in 1 Samuel, in the early chapters of 1 Samuel. However, later on in the Old Testament, it is a place of abandonment. And in Jeremiah 41:5, it's a place that symbolizes God's abandonment along with Shechem and Samaria. In other words, if Israel, Judah does not shape up, excuse me, then they too can become like Shiloh. However, when we look at it in the broader Deuteronomistic history, there are some complications with respect to how we understand Shiloh. So in 2 Samuel 7, verses 6 and 7, it says, I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day. All right, so that's important to note here. God is saying, I've never lived in a house. I've always been a tent dweller up to this point. And so this is why David does not need to build God a temple. God doesn't need a temple. He's never had one. However, in 1 Kings 8:16, some contradictory information is provided. It says, since the day that I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I've not chosen a city from any of the tribes of Israel in which to build a house that my name might be there. But I chose David to be over my people Israel. So here in 1 Kings, from the perspective of the Deuteronomistic historian, it says, since the day I brought my people out of Israel, I have not chosen a city. So for 2 Samuel, I've not lived in a house. In 1 Kings 8:16, I've not chosen a city. So the historian recognizes the challenges of 2 Samuel 7 and rephrases it to city so that there would not be any contradiction. I want to conclude our brief discussion on Shiloh with a reading from Baruch Halpern's essay Shiloh in the Anchor Bible Dictionary, Volume 5, page 1214. And he writes the following. Shiloh's eminence is best attested in the era just before the onset of the monarchy. Whether Shiloh had a temple is disputed. The textual evidence is ambiguous. On the one hand, 1 Samuel 1:9 and other nearby texts speak of the establishment in Shiloh as one with regular architectural features, a nave, a door jamb, doors. There are also references to a house, though whether this always implies an enclosed temple is unsure. On the other hand, as noted above, 2 Samuel 7:6-7 denies that Yahweh had had a, quote, house of cedar, unquote, prior to Solomon's building. He had roved around in a tent and in a tabernacle. Psalm 78:6-61 seems to concur. These verses make no mention of a temple. Which is it? Was the Shilohnite shrine a temple or an open-air sanctuary? The passages that imply the presence of a temple in Shiloh certainly stem from the sources used by the Deuteronomistic historian. For as we have seen, he took the opposite view. In this connection, it is noteworthy that neither Psalm 78:60 nor Jeremiah 7:12 speaks of a temple at Shiloh, although both affirm that Shiloh was, quote, the chosen place before Jerusalem. Their concurrence with the Deuteronomistic historians suggests a broad consensus among the reform movements of the 7th century. Despite Shiloh's election, Yahweh commissioned no temple before Solomon's, in accordance with 2 Samuel 7:6, and with a Deuteronomistic fixation on high places. Traditions of a temple in pre-monarchic Shiloh are probably the older, not the late traditions. The Deuteronomistic historian then presumably took the references to the Shiloh temple to describe a sanctuary, the construction of which had not been divinely ordained, and indeed no account of its construction is furnished. 2, that the sources of DH placed a temple at Shiloh does not guarantee that a temple was in fact there. So there you have it, a very quick rundown of Shiloh and kind of the intriguing twists and turns regarding its place in the history of Israel and its place in archaeology and its place among the sources in the Deuteronomistic history.